Palworld 1.0 has finally released, and I wanted to just come up with some tips for any new players getting into the game for the first time. These tips are in no particular order, they're just things that I wish I had known sooner. First major thing is going to be regarding base location. Now, there are a lot of different places you can make your base. In Palworlds, you have a large map that you can explore, but I think the best location for any new player is going to be on one of these two islands right here. These two islands are incredibly low level, so there's no high level pals that'll be killing you, and not only that, these two islands are kind of in the center of everything. Breeding is one of the most important things in Palworlds. It's something that will probably take up 90% of the in-game for you, because breeding is the easiest way to acquire pals that you don't want to go out there and catch yourself. So for example, Celine, this is actually a raid boss if I remember correctly, and I have a bunch of eggs here that I can just hatch at any time. This is something you can do with any pal, and all it requires is cake. Cake is a resource you're going to be making. It's not very hard to make, but it's pretty hard to get into in the early game because it requires a few different resources, which I'll lead into my next tip, which is going to be regarding making a cake base. Cake requires a few different things. It requires berries, and it requires eggs and honey. So honey come from these guys right here, the bee guards, which you can put in a ranch. And you also need milk, which come from these guys right here, the mazzarinas. These guys will give you a lot of milk. And then you can go ahead and take those resources and make cake. And these are the resources that are required to make cake. You can make a base with just these things in here. Flour will come from wheat, which is something you need to use a watering mill for. Now, the next major tip is going to be regarding an item you're going to need to farm a lot of, which is going to be PAL fluids. Now, there's a few different locations you can farm for this. The main location that people probably will farm for the most is going to be Gobfin's Turf. I like this location, but the location I like the most is going to be right down here on this beach, mainly because it's close to the base location I had mentioned earlier. Now, this location will have a lot of different pals that you can go ahead and capture to get a bunch of different pal fluids. There's these, what are they, Calypses, there's Gobfins, there's Celeres, there's a whole bunch of different pals that you can just go ahead and capture. And when you capture them, you'll get pal fluids. Next major tip, keeping up with the idea of farming particular pals, there is this beach right over here, which is a cross from the beach I already had mentioned, and nearby the base location I also said you should set up. This area has a lot of different pals that you can farm for very important materials. So let's go ahead and roam around for a bit, one should spawn eventually. Right over here is a Dictois. This is probably one of the best early game pals for mining. Definitely capture a few of these, especially if you're going to get into mining with the mining camps in the game. And right over here we have a Dumud. This guy is incredibly important to farm early game because he will give you high quality pal oils. This is a resource that is very, very important for a lot of different things. Not only that, it gives you some food as well. World settings. What do I recommend changing? The first major thing I strongly suggest changing is going to be the structure deterioration rate. This essentially means whenever you create an item that's outside of a PAL box radius, it will slowly take damage over time, and eventually deteriorate to where it's one shot or it gets destroyed. So this is a setting that I recommend putting to 0, so that way if you create a base location you're not too interested in and you pick up your PAL box and move to a different location, you don't need to worry about that base being destroyed over time if you don't want it to be destroyed. This just makes it to where things in the world will be permanently in the world. Next setting that I would recommend changing is going to be item weight rate. This is a dealer's choice depending on how you like to play your game. Me personally, I don't like being constantly encumbered. One of the big problems I had with this game early on was the weight system because it felt like I was basically unable to play the game for longer than 5 seconds. You know, I'd go out, explore, grab some items, and then I'm already encumbered and now I gotta go back to my base and drop those items off. I put this to 0 because it just makes the game a bit more enjoyable for me, but if you like having that weight system in the game, put it to whatever setting you would like it to be at. Next setting I recommend changing is going to be the time to incubate eggs. Breeding in Palworlds is one of the most time-consuming things in the endgame, especially if you do not change this setting, as certain eggs will take up to 10 hours just to hatch. This is something I never enjoyed, and I don't think I ever will. I put this to 0, that way I can hatch those eggs immediately. This is a big time saver for the long haul, especially with how important breeding is in the endgame. The next setting I recommend changing is going to be the maximum number of bases for each guild. Now, if you are a solo player and playing in your own world, this basically means you have 10 different base locations you can use. And with how big the map is in Palworld, you want as many base locations as possible, as I believe the actual normal amount is only 3. Now, 3 base locations is not enough. It just is not enough for how big the map is, so I recommend having as many bases as humanly possible. And speaking of bases, we have the maximum number of work pals at a base, which you can put up to 50. The normal amount is 20, and you can put it as anywhere low as just 1 pal per base, which I would never recommend doing. I recommend keeping it at 50, that way you can have the maximum amount of progress within your base. You can have pals for every sort of work type without worrying about one thing being more represented than the other. But I do want to note, this setting right here, out of any setting in the game that I have noticed the maximum amount of lag from, is going to be this one. So be very mindful of this setting, because the more pals that are in a location, the more lag you're going to have.